Thank you, past State President Gloria Hutchinson. Now, I know it's cliche to introduce someone who is so popular and so talented by saying, and now I'd like to introduce a woman who needs no introduction, so I'm not going to say that. But I will say, I want to introduce a woman who is definitely a woman in her own right, a consummate politician, one who continually proves, that's good, one who continually proves why the 19th Amendment was so important, and today and in the future. And I'd like to bring up Governor Rell, our great state governor.
Thank you very much, and I have to tell you, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. And it's kind of strange following all these eloquent speakers already, but it is nice that we're all here actually obviously commemorating the 19th Amendment and the fact that women did get the right to vote. You know, as we look around, think about this Capitol building that's standing behind me. It is one of the most beautiful Capitol buildings in all of the nation. But when this building opened, women didn't have the right to vote. In fact, they didn't get the right to vote for 40 more years. Can you imagine that? It's just unbelievable to me, especially from our vantage point in the year 2005. We take this right for granted, and I'll tell you something, we should never be able to do that. The struggle was long and hard, and today we remember those who made that struggle possible and made that struggle into a victory. You see these two nice young girls sitting out in the audience, and forgive me if I don't really remember. I think it's Lee and Lauren. All right. I met them on the inside of the Capitol. I asked them if they knew what we were celebrating today, and they said no. And I said, it was women's right to vote. Can you believe women didn't always have the right to vote? And they looked at me and said, no. And that's what today's all about, because we take it for granted, and these girls will never know any difference. My generation didn't know any difference. We had the right to vote. And yet, it's something that, you know, we should be celebrating every year. We do every year on this date, and remind the young girls of the struggle that went on many, many years before us. I have to tell you, I have a wonderful laundry list of things I want to say to you, but I want to read a little passage to you in a minute. This was a long, long fight that guaranteed this right for women to vote. Just as all civil rights movements unfortunately demand persistence, determination, and sacrifice. It's also significant that in the year 2005, we marked the 40th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This was landmark legislation that broke the grip of voting discrimination against African Americans deep in the South. And that was only 40 years ago this month. So regardless of whether we're celebrating the 85th anniversary or the 40th anniversary, we really need to remember how people struggled and sacrificed to bring the rights to us that we all enjoy today. Ladies and gentlemen, these are precious rights, and no one should ever take them for granted. Now, I have something I want to just share with you. I met a lovely lady many years ago who was a member of this General Assembly a long, long time ago. She lived in Litchfield, Connecticut, and in 1990, they asked her if she would write an article for the Litchfield paper and tell people what it was like to be there when they got the right to vote. So I'm going to read a little story that she actually wrote for the Litchfield paper. It's not long, but I think it gives you a flavor of what women really felt like when they got the right to vote. Her name was Harriet Clark, and I start. I wish to remind women that it was 70 years ago, now 85, on August 26, 1920, that the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, giving us the right to vote. The Connecticut legislature went on to ratify that amendment on September 14, 1920. And soon after, the Town of Cornwall Board of Admissions notified the town women, and I was one of them, on that date, that they had set a meeting to examine candidates for the electorate. So on a beautiful fall day, my father drove my mother, age 62, and me, age 25, to the Cornwall Town Hall. In those days, the town clerk's office, the usual meeting place, was a tiny room on the second floor, which on this day was too small for the excited group. We women gathered in the main room of the building. It was not set up as an auditorium, so we sat about informally, wherever we could find chairs. The board consisted of the town clerk, Whiting Wilcox, and the three selectmen, Patrick O'Donnell, or Cop as he was always called, Charles Breen, and Dr. Robert Granlenard. To come back to Cornwall, 1920, each of us individually was asked to read a few sentences of the United States Constitution, just to make sure we were literate. Then we were told to wait, as we would be given the oath as a group. If I remember correctly, a poll tax of $1 was collected from each. I looked about to see if any of our friends were there. Mother was chatting with Florin Johnson, who is the local correspondent to the area newspapers. I noticed the Marsh girls, Marion and Emily, with their mother and others. I was surprised that the greatest number seemed to be elderly people. Finally, in came a young woman I knew, Bessie Blake, 21, and a mother of a year-old baby left out in the wagon with her father, Clarence Blake. A future longtime Cornwall selectman, Bessie would also become a longtime officer, a registrar. This should have been a happy, smiling celebration of victory after 100 or more years of struggle, but the women were quiet, subdued, and very serious. At last, Whiting Wilcox and Cop O'Donnell rapped for attention. Whiting mounted the right-hand steps of the platform and said, "Raise your right hand and take the oath. Are you all 21 years or older?" When we assured him we were, he said, read solemnly, "You solemnly swear that you will be true and faithful to the state of Connecticut and to the Constitution of the government thereof and to the Constitution of the United States," and so on, ending with, "You will give your vote which you shall judge contributes to the best interest of Connecticut and the nation without respect of favor to any person. So help you God." We all said yes, very seriously, and quietly left the room and went our separate ways. My sisters were made voters where they were living, Litchfield, Norfolk, Virginia, and Baltimore, Maryland. My sister's experience in Baltimore was interesting. She was questioned orally in a large room filled with tables and a large staff writing. The officer filled in Sarah's form and came to a question of what political party she would affiliate with. When Sarah replied Republican, there seemed to be shocked silence, and the workers raised their heads to stare at a white woman who made such an admission. After later question of where she was born, and she answered Connecticut, there was an audible sigh of relief and understanding, and pencils once again began to write. My first voting was with paper ballots. I received my ballot and was immediately housed in a booth where privately I prepared the vote, being very, very careful to cross exactly in the center of the circle. My father warned me that if my cross went outside the circle, the vote could be thrown out. Then nervously I refolded the paper in just its original creases. Again, it would be thrown out if it were not just right. Then I stepped out and dropped my ballot in a slot, hoping it would not be thrown out. As time went on, I changed my voting residence to Danbury, where I was a teacher. There I became used to a machine vote. Then later, during the war years of the 1940s, I owned a car and was needed in Cornwall to help my widowed mother every weekend. I thought it was expedient to be a voter in Cornwall and asked for extra gas rationing to drive from home to work. So for nearly 50 years, I have been an elector of my birthplace. I have held several offices, first as an attendant at the poll, later as registrar, responsible for many details for elections, and for 10 years as a representative of the House of the Legislature. As I think back to that autumn day in 1920, I wonder if today's sophisticated 18-year-old voters feel anything of the dedication and awe we women in 1920 experienced. I wonder if we do feel that awe. I also handed out, and I hope all of you have a copy of it. Of course, when the 19th Amendment passed, then Governor Marcus Holcomb had to issue a proclamation to call the General Assembly into special session so that they could ratify not only this, but also take the action necessary to allow women in the state of Connecticut the right to vote. And I made copies today. I looked down and I thought, State of Connecticut by His Excellency Marcus H. Holcomb. Can you imagine poor Governor Holcomb today if he picked up this proclamation and it said, State of Connecticut by Her Excellency, Governor M. Jodi Rell, a proclamation. We've come a long, long way, but we should never, ever forget the struggle of those who went before us. And to these young ladies that are sitting out here today, don't ever forget, you have the right to vote. When you get to be old enough, I want you to make sure you do it every time you get the chance. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Now, I do have for Margarita and Trina. We have a proclamation. I'm done reading. I'll let you read. You don't want to keep hearing my voice. Go ahead.
State of Connecticut, by Her Excellency M. Jodi Rell, Governor, a proclamation. August 26, 2005 commemorates the 85th anniversary of the conclusion of the women's suffrage movement with the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, granting women the right to vote. The 19th Amendment, also known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, states the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The suffrage movement brought women together from all walks of life, including such notable feminist leaders as Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, Carrie Chapman Catt, Sojourner Truth, and Connecticut resident Alice Paul. Connecticut has played a central role in advancing the political status of women through the historic election of the late Governor Ella T. Grasso, as well as the election of prominent leaders such as the late Claire Booth Luce, former U.S. Representative Barbara Kennelly, and current Representatives Rosa L. DeLauria and Nancy L. Johnson. In recognition of the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, granting women the right to vote, and in accordance with the laws of the state of Connecticut,
I am Jodi Rell, Governor.
do hereby proclaim August 26, 2005 to be Women's Independence Day. I urge the citizens of Connecticut to join
Me.
in observing the 85th anniversary of women's suffrage with appropriate programs and activities. Read that part.
Okay. Given under my hand and seal of the state of Connecticut, State Capitol in Hartford, this 9th day of August 2005 of the independence of the United States, 229. Can't see it.
Signed, Jodi M. Jodi Rell and Susan Bisowitz, Secretary of State.
Thank you, ladies, very much.
Governor, what's the M stand for?
Marvelous. No, Mary.
Not the